Who's your commander?
Good luck.
Equip.
Move to combat.
Resolves.
Now, before you attack
Does
me,
anyone have an answer?
well played.
Good game.
Well, hello there, Tyrants of Commander Tables. This is Jumbo Commander, and today we're featuring a card from Rivals of Ixalan. It's Kumena Tyrant of Orazca. Kumena Tyrant of Orazca is 3 CMC, 1 green, blue for a 2/4 legendary merfolk shaman. And Kumena is all about merfolk. Tap another untapped merfolk you control, and Kumena can't be blocked this turn. Tap 3 untapped merfolk you control and draw a card. Tap 5 untapped merfolk you control and put a +1/+1 counter on each merfolk you control. How many times did I mention merfolk in that description? It's 5. That's a lot of merfolks. So I guess this is going to be a merfolk deck tech. I'm pretty sure I just did one of those. Here it is. I looked at the dual deck, Merfolk versus Goblins, and I saw so many great Merfolk in that deck that I said, let's build Merfolk using this discounted deck as a core piece. And actually, this is another boon for Merfolk. There are a lot of really great Merfolk that have had their prices just drop down tremendously because of this Goblins versus Merfolk set. Unfortunately, there's a lot of hype around Kumena, so it's inflated in price, so it'll balance it out. It'll just be a good deck. Okay, in that last video, I suggested we go Bant. Bant is great because there's a lot of really good merfolk in white from Lorwyn. So I had Derevi at the helm doing all sorts of tappy-tappy aggro shenanigans. And that was for my budget build. For my non-budget build, I actually extended into black for just a few of the sneaky black merfolk like Sig River Cutthroat. Leading that deck was Thrasios Triton Hero and Ravos Soul Tender. I picked Ravos because number 1, it had the right colors. Number 2, it has the Lord effect on it, which is kind of a merfolk thing. We like our merfolk lords. And also the ability to recur, and we know we're going to need to recur in this deck. But if you're interested in those deck techs, you can take a look at that last video. Just remember that Derevi led a budget merfolk deck. This deck will not be very budget. That's mostly because, well, I've already done a budget one, and also Kumena has skyrocketed in price, so I want to have the rest of the deck match Kumena's price tag. But I gotta say, Kumena is powerful and has many different strategies. I can imagine a Voltron strategy around that unblockable ability, or a draw long-term strategy around that second ability, or even a +1/+1 counter synergy around that third ability. Now, all of these are really strong on this commander, but they're actually not the strongest. If you really wanted an unblockable theme, I would suggest Cassetto. The reason why Cassetto's a little bit better is because you can target anything and make it unblockable, and Kumena only lets something target itself. That kind of puts it at a disadvantage for a Voltron deck. Let's say Kumena dies a bunch of times and you have to suit up something else. Well, with Cassetto, you can drop Cassetto and immediately make that creature unblockable. With Kumena, you have to go to the trouble of suiting Kumena back up again to make it a real threat. So, not the strongest of Voltron strategies, but still there. Well, what about that draw? Tapping 3 things to draw a card is great. I've played Cryptbreaker before. But wait a second, we have Azami Lady of Scrolls, which just taps a single wizard to draw a card, and I've seen how powerful Azami can get. And Kumena doesn't quite get there. It's still powerful, but not Azami? And what about that +1/+1 counters? Well, again, it only works with merfolk, and there is a merfolk that works much better with +1/+1 counters. Varel doubles them on target artifact, creature, or land. That's a huge effect, and it doesn't matter what the source. That way you can interact with crazy artifacts or creatures that just don't happen to be merfolk. So, is Kumena a failure because it does 3 things really poorly and only with merfolk? That feels very narrow. No. I do want you to understand this card so that we can talk about it and understand how to build it, but just because it isn't as good in those narrow strategies as the 3 cards I just mentioned, doesn't mean Kumena isn't fantastic. It's the ability to switch in between these different modes that makes Kumena so good. Let's talk about the more traditional merfolk strategy, and that's aggro. In modern, merfolk drop lords and turn them sideways. Hopefully there's some evasion. There's very little interaction. In fact, a lot of the interaction comes in the form of a merfolk curse catcher. And that's not even that great at countering these spells. It's very narrow. And that's the problem. You have a narrow, modern aggro deck, and if you try to get it to work in Commander, you're gonna be disappointed. But Kumena rolls in and suddenly turns a bunch of fish into a deck. That's why I believe that Kumena is the linchpin to make this a synergistic mid-range deck. What do we do in the deck normally? Well, we play a bunch of merfolk. Well, we turn that merfolk into card draw. We turn those piddly little tiny creatures into something bigger. Oh man, that's why I think that this deck is going to be great. I'm going to go over 3 main categories for this synergistic merfolk tribal mid-range deck. So many adjectives. It's called tippy-tappy value. It's all about tapping, untapping, getting value when we aren't just turning our creatures sideways. The next stage is don't get wiped. We need to commit creatures to the board, and we need to figure out how to manage that situation. We can't just flood the board. We also can't win if we hold creatures in our hand. The final category is being able to close out the game. Drawing cards is great, getting incremental value is great, but we need to be able to push through damage, and that can be difficult with a little army of 1/1s and 2/2s, no matter how synergistic they are. So let's start analyzing this deck tech with all the tippy-tappy value. The first thing we have to do is look at Kumena himself. Being able to draw a card is very powerful, and that puts this commander over the top. I think that being able to be unblocked is an interesting strategy, maybe a little small subtype, and same thing with those +1/+1 counters. But it's that draw card that really saves this as a commander. And I think we can really take advantage of that because merfolk have really enjoyed tapping and untapping throughout their history. We do lose out on a couple really good tappers and untappers when we cut white, but we have plenty in blue with Lull Mage Mentor, Surge Spanner, Destroying Games, or Fallow Sage. And I think that if we're playing around with tapping and untapping, Throne of the God Pharaoh has been a favorite in many of my decks, dealing a lot of damage. And as long as we're going to be tapping, let's make sure that we can untap as well. Seedborn Muse, Quest for Renewal, and Merkfiend Liege. All of these will let you get your tap value on each of your opponent's turn as well. You can also get some mana advantage while tapping your creatures with cards like Cryptolith Rite and Earthcraft. If you want to go really deep, you can try Harvest Season. I think that this is a little bit of a risky card because you really want to ramp before you play your creatures, not really afterwards, but Harvest Season has the ability to get so many lands onto the battlefield, it could be a fun but risky sorcery. I don't think I'd play it. I also find that cards like Opposition can help stall out a game, can really answer threats that your deck isn't prepared to answer. And as long as we're tapping and untapping, how about Paradox Engine? Just the broken legendary artifact that can go crazy with all of these shenanigans. Just imagine tap 3 merfolk, draw a card, then play a spell, untap them all with the engine, and then tap them again to draw a card. You throw in an Earthcraft or Cryptolith Rite, some mana rocks, and then suddenly you're playing your entire deck. Paradox Engine just breaks games of Magic. Next, I want to bring up a very important mantra for creature-based decks, and that's don't get wiped. Now, you don't have to always be able to avoid board wipes, but if you can't dodge them, you need to have the ability to rebuild quickly. Many decks fail in this area. If they get wiped once, they're suddenly out of the game. So make sure that yours is resilient enough to get yourself back into it. I think that's why a lot of blue decks run counter magic. Look out for board wipes. That's where you want to aim your swan song. You can also run cards like Heroic Intervention or Swift Warden that can definitely blank board wipes or specific removal spells. I'm also a big fan of board wipe protection in the form of Cauldron of Souls. Now, this is more of a personal preference than a really strong card, but I have to tell you how fun this thing is. You can tap the Cauldron and give any number of creatures persist. And Kumena has a built-in +1/+1 counter synergy. Oh my gosh, the combos are endless. Actually, the combos aren't endless. Because Kumena only hits merfolk, you can't run the classic persist creatures like Glenelender Archmage or Woodfall Primus. With a sacrifice outlet and +1/+1 counter synergies, those things are stupid. This is again another limitation of Kumena, but Kumena does a lot of great stuff with merfolk, so let's forget about all the +1/+1 counter synergies because we have our own awesome synergies. Not to mention Cauldron of Souls has another secret mode, which is win the political game by selecting some of your opponent's creatures to gain persist. Something like, I'll give your acidic slime persist if you hit not my Cauldron of Souls, but that nasty thing across the table over there. Now this last card literally answers the question of just don't get board wiped, but that's not what this category really is about. I think it's fine if you get board wiped if you can easily redeploy your forces. And so that's why I think card draw is so important in this deck. And again, it's another ability straight on Kumena. And some merfolk have gotten some great card draw on itself. Seafloor Oracle just came out and it's insane card draw. Speaking of which, you can also pair it with Biden of Thassa, Edric Spymaster of Trest, and Coastal Piracy if you want to have a more aggressive, deal combat damage type of deck. There's also some tribal cards that give us card draw as well, like Herald's Horn. If the right card is on top of your library, Herald's Horn will just let you draw it. And it's a little bit of ramp for those merfolk. I think it's a perfect include, and it brings up another set of cards that can give you tons of advantage, and that's the ability to play with the top of our library. You might have watched the most recent episode of Game Nights on YouTube, put out by the Command Zone. Spoiler warning. In that episode, Jimmy played Kumena and did some crazy stuff with the top of his deck, and green is great at manipulating the top of their deck. You can run Sensei's Divining Top and Lifecrafter's Bestiary, Sylvan Library, the new forerunner of Heralds. Heck, if you're outside of merfolk and you really like this strategy, you can throw in an Oracle of Moldiah, Vizier of the Menagerie, Into the Wilds, Nissa Steward of Elements. This is a cool way to gain card advantage in green-based decks. I do have to admit that the shuffling around of cards does get a little bit dirtily. It takes a lot of steps sometimes to get real card advantage, but I can't stress enough how these sets of cards are engines. Just like Kumena himself is an engine. You don't want single one-off card draw in a mid-range deck like this. You need an engine to keep pushing you ahead. That's why I'm also going to include cards like Vanquisher's Banner and Kindred Discovery. I also think I have to mention Zendikar Resurgent, a Commander All-Star. Doubles your mana, and whenever you cast a creature spell, draw a card. Oh, so good. But wait a second. Can we just throw this good card that has card draw on it into our deck? It's 7 converted mana cost. Let's pull up the curve of our deck and see, oh, we're hovering around the 2 and 3 CMC. What does Zendikar Resurgent do for our strategy? Are we really going to get up to 7 and use the doubling of mana? Maybe Vanquisher's Banner and Kindred Discovery are also too much, too over the top. If I evaluate Zendikar Resurgent only on its ability to draw me cards, I don't want to play that. It needs to be a mana doubler as well, and I'm looking back and saying, where am I spending all of this mana? I don't know. Am I going to play this on 7 and then on 8 have 16 mana and cast 5 merfolk? No, that's unreasonable. I think this is a pitfall for a lot of Commander players, because they see a legitimately great card like Zendikar Resurgent, and they feel like it should just fit into their deck. Or maybe they ignore the mana curve or the mana cost, and they look at that need to draw a card, and Zendikar Resurgent looks great. I don't know, but the key to deck building is finding out what your deck wants to do and have cards that can support it. In this category, we've identified a weakness, which is basically that we have to commit creatures to the board to tap and add counters, and so we're very susceptible to dumping our hand and being left empty. That would suck. And so we have a lot of card draw and protection to make sure that doesn't happen to us. Does Zendikar Resurgent really contribute to that need in our deck? No. A different deck might say, I will need all of the mana. And then Zendikar Resurgent will be like, I'm here, I will solve all of your problems. But for now, I think I'm going to leave it out of the list. In the final category, we need to close out this commander game. We can't just keep drawing cards forever and adding counters, even though that sounds awesome. I think Kumena's Voltron ability is a big boon in this area. Equipment pair very well with creature strategies, and so some equipment could go really well in this deck and maybe even support a Voltron strategy. I've put in here Dowsing Dagger because it'll go unblocked and flip into an awesome land. And I've also included Sword of Light and Shadow. Sword of Light and Shadow represents a whole class of equipment that does awesome things when it connects with your opponent. Kumena's in a great place to make sure your Sword of Light and Shadow hits, and when it does, you gain 3 life, inconsequential, but you can return target creature card from your graveyard to your hand. In many cases, that is better than card draw. This is a very good sword, and it protects you against really, really relevant colors. So Kumena's first unblockable ability could end games, the second one keeps you in games, and the third one can also help win. If you go wide enough, you can make an army big enough to crush your opponents. That's why I think cards like Deep-Root Waters would be really, really good, because it'll give you the merfolk you need to go wide. Once you have your merfolk army, you can disrupt your opponent with a card like Tempest Caller, or one of my favorites, Cryptic Command. It has a hidden mode. I know you all want to counterbounce, but tap all creatures your opponents control is insane. Please use it in Commander. There's also a card called Cyclonic Rift. It wins games. Okay, moving on. Of course, there's even more evasion hidden in our classic modern merfolk. Lord of Atlantis and Master of the Pearl Trident will give your merfolk island walk, and every so often, you'll just island walk your way to victory. Herald of Secret Streams works incredibly well with Kumena's +1/+1 counter ability, and blue has many different tricks and sneaky ways to get damage through. This has been my synergistic tribal merfolk midrange. It focused on tappy value, tapping stuff, mostly Kumena, to draw cards, build up your army, untap during your opponent's turn only to tap them again, having all sorts of instant speed, shenanigans, and everything you could want in a deck. You're going to be aware because in order to do that tappy strategy, you'll need 3 or 5 merfolk on the battlefield, and you're not going to be doing a lot because you could be drawing cards. So you're going to protect from board wipes, and even if they do wipe you, you'd have drawn so many cards that you can just redeploy your whole army all over again. And after you're done drawing cards, I don't know when that's going to be, but not soon, you eventually need to win the game. So maybe you suit up Kumena and do some commander damage, maybe you make your whole team unblockable, maybe you make everything so big your opponents can't help but chump block turn after turn after turn. No matter what, Kumena solves the problems that merfolk have. I think that this is the best merfolk commander, and if you're interested in this deck, I highly recommend you have Kumena at the helm. I want to start off by thanking my patrons. Thank you so much to Zach and Lucky, my associate producers, and all of the other patrons: Abel, Anxiety, Brian, Braun, Dan, Eric, Ian, Kelton, Luciano, Martin, Michael, Rick, Tommy, and brought to you today especially by the letter R. My name is Jumbo Commander, and I'm a Commander Deck Techs. We had 2 this week, and I have plenty more on the horizon. I'm so excited for all this new rival stuff. I hope you are too. Go ahead and support me by subscribing to my channel, liking this video. I don't know, all sorts of other social media stuff. Do it all. All right, everyone, I'll see you really soon with more Commander content.